is unfolding in Washington, right? Now is not just another political disagreement or a passing controversy destined to disappear in a news cycle. It represents a deeper shift taking place behind closed doors, one that signals mounting tension within Republican leadership itself. The headlines only capture fragments of the story. Beneath them lies a slow but visible recalculation of power, loyalty, and self-preservation that is reshaping internal dynamics at the highest levels of government. This moment did not originate from political opponents or external pressure. Instead, it emerged from inside the same political structure that once appeared unified. Analysts and observers have noted that when internal support begins to weaken, the consequences are often more significant than any outside challenge. What we are seeing now is not chaos, but calculation. A reassessment of risk is taking place quietly, deliberately, and with long-term consequences in mind. In politics, there are rare moments when silence speaks louder than public statements. When key figures choose not to intervene, not to defend, and not to reassure, that absence itself becomes a message. It travels quickly through institutional networks, donor circles, and legislative corridors. It tells everyone watching that assumptions are changing. The protective instincts that once held firm are no longer guaranteed. Reports indicate that private discussions among senior lawmakers have grown increasingly direct. These are not televised exchanges or campaign-style speeches. They are strategic conversations focused on viability, exposure, and political cost. In such rooms, the central question is no longer about loyalty, but about sustainability. How much risk can be carried and by whom? According to multiple political analysts, the tension centers on unresolved controversies that continue to attract scrutiny. While public narratives vary, what matters most internally is not perception, but documentation. Lawmakers are guided less by speculation and more by whether explanations remain defensible over time. When doubts persist without resolution, hesitation becomes risk. At the heart of this recalculation is the role of leadership figures who are expected to stabilize uncertainty. When those figures choose caution over defense, it signals a boundary being drawn. Not a declaration of guilt, but a recognition that continued alignment carries consequences of its own. In Washington, political survival often depends on knowing when to step forward and when not to. Observers emphasize that this shift should not be misunderstood as moral awakening. Politics rarely operates on that axis. Instead, it is driven by incentives, timing, and exposure. When circumstances evolve, strategies evolve with them. What once appeared advantageous may suddenly become a liability. Financial scrutiny, regulatory oversight, and international considerations all play a role in shaping these decisions. Even when no conclusions have been reached, the presence of ongoing examination alone can alter behavior. Lawmakers respond not only to outcomes, but to probability. The question becomes whether alignment increases uncertainty or limits it. As internal calculations change, so does public posture. Language shifts subtly. Emphasis moves from defense to responsibility, from loyalty to process, from unity to institutional integrity. These changes are rarely announced outright, but they are evident to those paying attention. For the individual at the center of the storm, this transition is particularly isolating. Political power depends heavily on collective reinforcement. When that reinforcement weakens, isolation follows quickly. Calls become less frequent. Statements grow more measured. Support becomes conditional rather than automatic. At the party level, the effects are even more pronounced. Divisions that were once manageable become visible fractures. Some members argue for continued alignment, viewing any separation as betrayal. Others push for distance, seeing separation as necessary for survival. This divide is not ideological alone, it is strategic. History shows that political organizations often fracture not over belief, but over risk tolerance. When the perceived cost of unity exceeds the cost of division, realignment becomes inevitable. That is the phase Washington appears to be entering now. It is important to note that none of this guarantees a specific outcome. Political systems move slowly and accountability processes are complex. What has changed is not the conclusion, but the trajectory. Momentum has replaced stagnation. Decisions that were once deferred are now being reconsidered. Analysts caution against framing this moment as justice versus corruption, or heroes versus villains. Reality is far less cinematic. What is unfolding is a collision of ambition, caution, and institutional pressure. Each actor involved is responding to incentives as they perceive them. For some, this moment represents an opportunity to redefine leadership. For others, it is a warning about the limits of personal loyalty in institutional systems. Power, once centralized, is beginning to diffuse. As the process continues, time itself becomes a factor. Political hesitation is often temporary. Once a shift begins, it tends to accelerate. What once took months can unfold in weeks. Public processes often lag behind private decisions, creating the illusion of sudden change. Ultimately, this story is less about any single figure and more about how political systems respond under strain. It illustrates a fundamental reality of governance. Authority depends on consent, and consent depends on confidence. When confidence erodes, structures adapt. Whether this period leads to resolution, reconfiguration, or prolonged division remains uncertain. What is clear is that the internal dynamics of Washington are changing. The assumptions that once held are being tested, and the outcomes will shape the political landscape for years to come. This is not the end of a story, but the transition into a new phase. One defined not by spectacle, but by strategic movement. Not by slogans, but by calculation. And not by certainty, but by consequences that are still unfolding.